Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's been a bit of a while now since I filmed and uploaded anything, but we've got here my new 2012 FG XR6U. It's one of the Eco LPI liquid injection gas models. I bought this car about a month ago now, and it's a one owner car. It was owned by Ford by the dealership since new and was used as their parts delivery car. Overall, the car's in really nice condition. It's in the sort of mid hundreds in terms of mileage, and it's got a full service history since new. But I have found that the 6-speed auto, when it's a little bit flaky, it just doesn't shift how I'd expect it should do. It's when you're not driving the car hard, it's a little bit sort of slurry and sluggish between the first 3 gears. And when it's cold, you get a little bit of a flare sometimes between third and fourth. And when you're coming to a stop, it sometimes clunks a bit to the driveline. Now, when the car's warmed up, if you give it 100% wide open throttle, the gearbox shifts perfectly. It's nice and snappy through every gear, so I'm pretty confident that the gearbox itself is okay. After doing a bit of research, these 6 speeds are used obviously in more cars than the Falcons. They're a German main gearbox, and they've been found in Audis, BMWs, various other German made cars. And because of this, there's a lot of information out there on them, and it appears that other people into those cars have had the same sort of problems with these gearboxes, and it generally appears to be that the cause of the problem is problems with the valve body in them, from solenoids, leaking seals, and overall parts wearing out inside the actual valve body itself. So what I'm going to do in this video today is we're actually going to drop the pan off the transmission of this and give it a full recondition of the valve body with a sonnax zip kit, and I'm going to go through the process of that. This is going to be quite an in-depth video because it's going to cover doing the valve body, but it'll also have things such as the oil change on one of these gearboxes, mechatronic sleeve seals, etc. So if you're looking for information on the ZF 6-speed in one of these FGs, this is going to be the video for you. So we're going to have a quick look now at the parts that we've got to recondition the valve body. So the first off here is this sonnax zip kit. Sonnax makes a lot of replacement parts of transmissions, and they've made a zip kit here designed for the ZF that addresses key wear areas in the valve body that are renowned for leaking. We've got a separator plate. I guess you would just say that this is a gasket that goes between the two halves of the valve body. These things have got a bonded material on here that's renowned for starting to fail and causing internal leaks within the valve body. There's a part number stamped on it here that says AO52. So in the ZF transmissions, there's a fair few different combinations of valve bodies that could be living in them, and they all have different separator plates. So on the passenger side rear of the transmission, there's a little number that starts with 1068. I took this number and gave it to the supplier of these parts, and they cross-referenced that with ZF to determine which valve body I had and then what separator plate I need in it. So just because you've got a Falcon doesn't mean you're going to have an AO52. This could vary depending on the year, and as far as I'm aware, ZF just throws different combinations in them at their free will, so you don't know what you're going to have. So it's entirely possible that every Falcon with a ZF 6-speed out there is equipped with an AO52. But an interesting little thing that I have noted is I've got a friend that parts out a lot of FG Falcons as a bit of a side hustle. And I've compared this 1068 number on various ZFs that he's removed, and it's always different. And when you put that number into Google, you'll see mention of different separator plates. So just please pay attention to this, or you might end up with the wrong parts. So next up, we've got here our bridge seals, our mechatronic sleeve seal, and our tube seals. So on the ZF, you've got this seal here, which basically goes from the inside of the transmission to the outside, and it's where your wiring harness connector would plug in. These are pretty renowned for leaking on these, and it has to be removed to get the valve body out. So new one of those. This here is the bridge seal. This is just a little rectangle plastic thing with rubber seals on each side of it. These are renowned for the seals deteriorating and crushing down over time, or the plastic itself cracking. It causes a lot of leaks and drop in pressure inside the transmission, which leads to a whole host of shifting issues. And then we have our tube seals here, much like the bridge connector there, or bridge seal. These go between the valve body and the transmission, and again, the seals crush down over time and cause fluid leaks within the transmission. Next up, we've got a genuine ZF solenoid kit. There's really not much to look here in this. It's just the solenoids that go in a transmission, and it's by far the most expensive part of everything you're seeing here. So these things are pretty renowned for leaking and just not performing as they should, as they get some higher mileage on them. So we've got that to go in there. Then we've got our filter and pan gasket. So being an FG, I'm lucky in the fact that I've got a steel pan on the car from factory. So I can just get a separate filter and pan gasket, which is much cheaper. If you're running, say, a BF Falcon or an older model Territory, you've probably got a plastic pan on it. And in the plastic pan, the filter assembly is part of it, along with the gasket. So the whole thing has to be replaced at once, or you need to upgrade to a steel pan. As for the gasket that I've got here for the pan, the original ZF ones are just a thin green paper. This is an improvement in my mind. It's just a piece of aluminium with a bonded rubber gasket on it. The supplier of my transmission parts tell me that they sell these all the time and that they never have any issues with leaking with them. Whereas with the paper gaskets, if you've damaged the pan even slightly when you've removed it or over torqued it at some point, it might leak, whereas these won't. And lastly, we've got oil to go in the transmission. So I've got 6 litres here, and the oil I'm using is Motorcraft's Mercon SP. Now usually I'd recommend in a ZF 6-speed transmission to only use the Lifeguard 6 oil. This is the only oil that ZF officially approves for use in them, and any other oil may work, may not. So that's why I recommend it. In the past, I used to go to my Ford dealership and get this here. This is just ZF Lifeguard 6 rebranded in a Ford bottle. You can buy this oil various different places, but my Ford dealership looks after me, so this was the cheapest way for me to get it. However, when I went in there this time and asked for oil, they couldn't supply that to me, and they said that instead, Ford in the US is now specifying Mercon SP for all ZF transmissions, so this is what they gave me. Now, I've read on the internet various times over the years that Mercon SP is Lifeguard 6, and then there's other people saying it's not. But my dealership tells me that in the US, this is what Ford uses factory fill in the 6HP26, the 6R60 I think it is, 6R80, the various ZF transmission combinations that they've got in their cars over there, and that apparently Mercon SP basically is ZF Lifeguard 6, but it's manufactured for Ford in the USA with a red dye added to it instead of being manufactured in Germany and having a sort of honey colour to it as the original Lifeguard 6 oil has. A lot of people out there now are using various different oils from Penrite, Gulf West and whatever in these cars that say that they are fine for use in the ZF. ZF doesn't approve any of these oils, but I'm sure they're fine. It's up to you what you want to use. But at the end of the day, expensive transmission, oil cost is kind of negligible, because if it doesn't work properly, now you're going to have to do it all over again. So, my opinion, just use the proper oil for it and you'll be fine. So you'll probably be wondering where I got all of this stuff from. So with the exception of the oil, which come from the Ford dealership, I purchased all of this stuff here from Driveline Auto Parts from their Adelaide branch. These guys are Australia wide and they supply transmission stuff. That's what they do. So I actually found it really hard for me to get a hold of this zip kit. Most places I rang up either just flat out didn't carry it, or they refused to sell to the public, or additional to that, they just wanted my valve body to repair. But Driveline Auto Parts was willing to sell me the parts, and I found their guys really knowledgeable and easy to deal with, so I'm pretty happy with their service. As for the cost, there's no point me giving this is what it's going to cost on each part, because depending when you watch this video or where you purchase the parts from, it's going to vary over time. But as a rough breakdown, I guess, this zip kit is around $250 at the time of the video. Your sleeve seal, bridge seal, etc., they're around $60. The separator plate, $150. The solenoids here are the big one, $500 for those. And then your filter element and gasket, $60 for the pair of them. As for the oil, I'm definitely not going to give a price on that one because, as I said, my Ford dealership looks after me, and if you walk in there, you probably won't get it for the same price. So look at Lifeguard 6 oil online. It's probably going to cost you around 30 something a litre, and you can buy the Lifeguard 6 oil from Driveline Auto Parts as well, and I think at the time they quoted me 32 a litre, thereabouts. Or if you're going to use a different brand, it'll just depend on what you're going to choose. So now we've looked at all the parts there, I guess we'll stop rambling on about it. It's time to get the car in the shed, and we'll take this pan off the transmission and start having a look at removing the valve body. Okay, so now I've got this thing in the shed and lifted up at a suitable height to work on. The first thing I've gone and done is just disconnect the negative battery terminal. The reason for this is because the valve body has got the TCM unit mounted to it, which is a computer, and I don't think you really want to be disconnecting these things while it's live. So that's just been done to be safe and make sure we don't damage it. Something to be mindful of is the Series 2 FG Falcons with these touchscreen ICCs in them. They've started to develop a bit of a reputation for them for failing once you disconnect the battery. I don't know why they do it, but it's happened to a fair few people where they've disconnected the battery in one of these cars, reconnected it, and the screen fails to turn on anymore. So that is a risk that I have to take here because I've got to disconnect the battery, but just keep that in mind if you're doing this on a Series 2 FG with this style screen in it, that could happen to you. So the first thing we're going to need to do once we've got the car lifted up is take this pan off the transmission and drain all the fluid out of it. So I like to just use a large flat storage tub like that, that's bigger than the size of the transmission pan to collect all the oil. To undo the pan bolts in the transmission, they're just a T40 Torx head bit. But before you undo that, the first thing I do is I like to crack loose the filler bolt up here. That's just an 8mm Allen head. Now Ford has conveniently placed underneath here an O2 sensor directly across from the Allen head. So, you've got all this section of exhaust either side of it, but right there is the best spot. So your traditional sort of socket mounted Allen head doesn't fit in there too easily because you hit this sensor. So what I like to do is just take an Allen key like this, put it in there, and then if it's too tight, you just crawl up to the back of the car, put your foot on it and push it forwards, and it'll crack it loose. So I've already loosened that off. So the next step is I'll just start with the rear bolts in the back of this pan and start loosening them off and work my way back, which causes the pan to tip down and the oil to start running out. Okay, so now most oil is drained out of that pan. I just have a single bolt up the front here and one sitting here just to hold it on until I'm ready to take it off. Now you would have seen that the oil that was draining out of that was quite dirty looking. Every time I've done a service on the ZF, the oil that comes out always looks like that. I guess it's because it's a honey coloured oil. It shows up the dirt in it a lot more than a typical red oil would. So now here comes the tricky part. You need to support this pan with your hand and remove these last two bolts, and if you're careful about it, you'll avoid dropping it in your drain pan and getting a face full of oil. Now there will be a bit of oil still sitting in this pan, so pace it, sort of just tip it like that and get it out. And there you go. So there's our valve body unit, which is what we'll be removing next. These yellow and blue things at the back are the solenoids. Now, to those of you that have serviced the old 4-speed transmissions in the Falcons, you'd remember that their filters were held in with a retaining spring. It's not the case on the ZF. They just pull out. Now you'll see down the end there's a little orange seal. I've been lucky this time it's come out on the filter. Usually those seals will get stuck up in the valve body and you just need to get a little flat blade screwdriver and flick them out. Now the transmission pan's off and the filter's out the way, before you can remove the valve body, the next thing we've got to take out is the mechatronic sleeve seal, which is just up here on the back of the gearbox. So you'll see I've already unplugged the harness from the transmission. To do this, you just need to rotate this little ring on the back of it anti-clockwise and it'll pull out. Next up, there's this little white clip here on the valve body. This is what engages into the sleeve seal up here. So try and do it here one-handed. You need to basically push this clip in, pull down like that, and now that's disengaged. So all you got to do now to pull this out is you just basically got to lever it out. They usually won't come out by hand, so you have to get a screwdriver or something and just pry it a bit, and then this connector or sleeve seal will pop straight out. So there's our little sleeve seal removed. You'll see now up in the transmission, that's where it came from. So next up, you can remove the valve body. So it's all the T40 screws around here, which are the big ones. These ones, there's a few along here, a few up the back, and then there's 3 that run along the back of the TCM unit up here, which will be shorter than the rest. So I've already gone around and cracked all of these bolts loose, so now I can just back them out with my finger. I've got sitting next to my drain pan here, the oil pan off the transmission, so I can sit the valve body in it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the majority of these bolts, but leave 1 or 2 in, just so it doesn't fall out of the transmission. And then I'll be able to put one hand in and support it so I can loosen it off, because these do have a little bit of weight to them when you're in this sort of position under a car. So now with the valve body removed, you can see up in here the little tube seals that I was talking about earlier, and up the front the bridge seal. Now it's a bit hard to see on video that these tube seals are pretty well just pressed flat with the casing, which is a good sign that they've sort of worn out. They should be protruding slightly. And as for the bridge seal, quite a similar deal. I popped it out earlier and was just looking in the rubber and it's all compressed. But they're an easy thing to replace, which we'll do when we're about to put the valve body back in. Now we'll go and have a look at the valve body and start pulling it apart. So here's the valve body removed from the car. There's 2 parts of this. So obviously this here is the valve body. And then this whole module on the back of it is the TCM, or transmission control module. A quick note, be really careful not to touch the pins on the back of this thing where the wiring harness connector goes. There's warnings all through the sonnax kit and through the ZF documentation I've got saying not to touch these because they're prone to damage from static discharge. So just don't touch those. So before we can split this valve body in half, the first thing that needs to happen is you need to remove the TCM unit. Now in the solenoid kit that I've got here, it shows the diagram of which bolts to remove for this. So this is an M-shift transmission because it's got a manual shifter in the car instead of an electronic one. And these green dots here represent the screws we need to remove, which is here, here, these 2, and these 2 here. And once they're removed, we can flip the valve body over and start taking off the TCM unit. So another note I might just quickly mention here is when you replace the ZF transmissions and people talk about swapping over to mechatronics unit, this is what they're talking about here. The reason for doing that is because the TCM unit mounted to this is paired to the car. So if you don't change it over, it's just not going to work in the car unless you have it programmed to it. So people go along and just swap over the whole entire valve body. But it's realistically just the TCM unit here that is the part that needs to be swapped. So if you've got a transmission that's had water or something in it, I probably wouldn't bother swapping over the valve body, and I would just take this unit here because the valve body is going to be full of water. So that's just a little note there. That's the mechatronics unit that people are talking about swapping over in them. So I've already gone along and loosened off every single bolt on the bottom of this valve body, just cracked them slightly so they're finger tight. So first step obviously is to remove these bolts of the TCM, as I said before. So now with all of these out, flip the valve body over. Just a little note to make when you put this back on later on. There's a little tiny slide here that comes out that hooks onto an electronic sensor in the transmission just to tell it what position your gear shift is in. So when you put it back together, you're going to make sure the little plastic tab here slots into that. So on the other side now of this valve body, which is the side that mounts up to the transmission, you'll see here there's a pin there and a pin there. These are alignment pins that go through the TCM unit and through the two halves of the valve body. So we've got to very carefully pry this thing at these locations to lift this off, but really take a lot of care because honestly there's nothing worse you could destroy in this transmission than this module here. You ruin a valve body, you can get one from a wreck. You ruin a TCM unit and you're going to have to find someone that can reprogram it to your car, so be so careful with it. And there we go, that's the TCM unit removed. So now I'll put this away somewhere safe where it can't be damaged. Alright, so with the TCM unit removed now, we can look at separating these two halves of the valve body. So we can flip it back over now. And what we want to do here is obviously remove all of the bolts that are in it. And then the side that's got these solenoids in it, we want to flip that over. The bottom half of the valve body's got a lot of different little ball bearings in it as check valves and additional little pieces, and if you lift that side out, they're going to fall out everywhere. So take the side off with the solenoids, flip it over. Otherwise you're going to have a really bad time because stuff's going to go everywhere and you won't know what to do with it. A quick note here, the bolts that go through the TCM unit are longer than the rest of the ones that are for the two halves of the valve body, so just keep them separate, otherwise they're all the same. Alright, so that's all of our bolts removed there, so now we can separate these halves. And there is our two halves of our valve body now separated. So now we've got these two halves apart. The first thing that's immediately obvious is if you look around the separator plate, you'll see all over the place signs of this gasket material failing. Now some of that obviously is going to have occurred when I've just separated it there, but you can also see there's like residue built up between all of here, which is suggesting once again that oil's been sort of seeping around. So that is a sign there that the separator plate's definitely on its way out, and I haven't looked at the other side yet. Another very problematic area in these transmissions valve bodies is these accumulator dampeners here. I'll pull these out soon and have a closer look at them, but they're basically a little rubber plug, and they should be sitting either flush with the top of the valve body or just slightly depressed, but some of these are pressed down quite far. So that is another wear area, and when these wear out it can cause problems with the very typical 2-to-1 downshift clunk that these transmissions experience. Again, on this other side of the separator plate, I'm seeing a lot of fatigue and damage on the bonded sealing surfaces here. So I've sat the top half of the valve body away to the side for now, and we're just going to focus on the bottom half. So there's a few things that we need to remove out of here before we go flipping the thing upside down and whatever, because we don't want it to fall out. So we've got here these little valves with springs on it. It's just 2 of them. Up here is a filter that we need to remove. It just will pull out. And there's a little filter down here. And then littered throughout the whole valve body is various little check balls. These here. So you'll see there's 3 here. You go around the transition, you basically just look anywhere you see a little hole like that drilled with a little weird shape like that. So here, that'd be another one in there. There's got up here will be another one. There's going to be a little plastic check ball in there, so you need to make sure you get all of those out and put them away safe so that you don't lose them. And then once we've cleaned all of this up and put all the bits in it we need to put in, we'll put all of those back in their places. So I've just got a little plastic pan over here that I'm going to sit all of these in. These 2 springs are the same, so you don't have to worry about mixing them up. Now the bonus for me doing this on video is if I misplace any of these and don't know where I took them out from, I'll be able to look back at the video and find their spots. So this here is all little check ball is, just a little plastic bead, I guess you would call it. Okay, so it looks like in this particular valve body we've got 9 little check balls, 2 filters and these 2 springs. Now I can drain the remaining oil that's in here and I can take a look at pushing out these little accumulators, dampers. Alright, so now I've drained the majority of the oil out of this valve body, so it's not going to make too much of a mess when I tip it up. We're going to have a look at getting rid of these accumulator dampers. So they've got little holes on the back side you can use to press them out, but oftentimes like this, just give them a bit of a tap and they'll fall out. As they have done there. So these aren't in too bad a condition compared to some of them, but I find here they're all over different condition depending on where they've been sitting. So if you look here, I'll try and get the camera to focus. So these are just a little rubber plug in the end that acts as a damper. And you'll see that one of them here is a lot more crushed down than the other. Now in a lot of videos I've seen on these on YouTube, they've been way worse than the ones that are in my transmission, but you can still see they're definitely starting to show some signs of wear on them. Okay, so now we've got all of the check balls, accumulator dampers, filters, etc. out of this valve body. We can now have a look at what actually goes wrong in these things and what parts in the sonnax kit we'll be using to fix it. So the sonnax kit doesn't just replace everything in the valve body. I'm going to say that to begin with. It only fixes the things that are known for usually causing leaks and problems in the transmission. So starting with this part of the valve body, we've got the accumulator dampers that I pointed out before. Where their problem is that they are just a piece of rubber that goes hard and compresses over time. The next thing we have are what are called the end plugs. So around various parts of the valve body, you will see little clips like this holding in a round aluminium plug. So for whatever reason, Sonnax believes that these are a leak point and they give you a replacement that is a revised style plug that fixes up their leaks, which we'll have a look at in a moment. Other than those two things, it's the separator plate that's the other part that causes most of the leaks in these, and the bridge seals in the transmission that I showed earlier, and issues with the solenoids. So that's the bulk of the problems that you have with these. So here we are having a look at the zip kit. So what we have here is we'll start with the accumulator dampers. So what Sonnax has done is they've made a revised edition where instead of being a rubber plug, they've put a little spring in it instead. So obviously it's not going to wear out over time and fatigue from heat, etc. And then these here are all your little end plugs. So the standard ones in the transmission are just an aluminium plug, but Sonnax has revised them with an O-ring in there, so they seal up nicely, presumably because these can move around a little bit. Over time, I'm guessing they wear down on the outside of them, which allows fluid to leak past, and then you lose pressure in the transmission. So there's various ones of those that go in it in different sections. Now, the way that Sonnax has done this makes it really easy to read. So all of these bags are numbered. So you've got bag 5, bag 6, etc. And then they give you a diagram of the two halves of the valve body. So what I was referring to as the lower half before is actually the upper half. So you see here is your accumulator dampers, and that tells you that that comes from bag 6. So you would go to bag 6, and that's what you use. And then you'll see up here it's got some of the end plugs, and it tells you that you need 2 of the small ones, which come from bag 5. And you need 1 of the large ones, which comes from bag 4, and then down here you need 2 of the large ones that also come from bag 4. So it's very simple to follow. Now in the Sonnax kit there is more parts of what I'm showing here. So in this bag I've got left essentially a ton of little O-rings. Now, as far as I can tell, the majority of these are for your solenoids, so if you're reusing them, you could just replace the O-rings that are on them, but because I've got a new solenoid kit for it, they've come with O-rings pre-installed, so we won't be using those. Okay, so now I'm going to start removing some of these end plugs. I'm not going to do all of them on camera because it's the same process for each one, so just give you an idea what you're going to do. So they've got basically like a little clip that retains them. Some of these you can get from the top side, which is like a little seal pick like this. But you want to be careful not to lever on there too hard, because if you do, you'll end up marring this surface here. And this is a machine surface, obviously, for the separator plate to seal on, so you don't want to damage that. So I've already done 2 of them here. And for these 2, I was able to pick them out from the top. But this one here is too tight of a little slot it's in. So what I'm going to try and do is come down the bottom here, and you can see the bottom of the clip. And push up, and now that's lifted the clip up to a point that I can pick it out. Now keep in mind also, some of these end plugs, as you can maybe be able to see here, they're spring loaded because there's stuff behind them, so just hold it in and support it with your finger. when you take this little clip out, and that's the clip there. And now you should be able to release it. Some of these also, even though this is spring loaded, it's sticking. So what I do is come along just with a set of pointed nose pliers, and you can grab onto the end of it and just very carefully wriggle it until it will come out. Just persevere with it, don't force it. And there we go, that's a little plug removed. Now so far all of these that I've pulled out have had an amount of little bits of wear on the side of them, so I'm guessing that yes, they do wear down and it creates them to leak like I was saying earlier. So then these come from bag 5 as it shows in the drawing. So I'm going to need one and a little O-ring to go around it on the replacement. So now I'll give you a little bit of a look. So on the right here is your standard end plug, and this is a Sonnax revised edition with a little O-ring on here. So presumably this thing wears down a bit over time, and the machine board that it lives in also wears down a bit, so fluid can leak past. So by putting this O-ring on here, that fixes that problem up for you. Now as for installing it, I just grab a little bit of loose transmission fluid that's here already, use it to lubricate the O-ring, and then they simply just press straight back in the hole that it came out of. Again, some of these go in easier than others. Sometimes you have to give them a little bit of additional support. But don't hit anything hard or force it because you'll just damage it. Okay, so that's now pressed in there. Just come along with that little clip that we removed and push it down. So that it snaps in place. And that is the 3 end plugs for this side replaced. So there's 5 end plugs in total in this that need to be replaced, and with those replaced now all that's left is the little accumulator dampeners. So it's really not much to these, you just drop the spring down in each of the holes first. All I do next is just, again, a little bit of oil around them, and they'll drop straight in. So that's all of those installed now. Now, unlike with the original dampeners in there, they're all sitting at the same level as each other. They've all got a springy effect to them. Whereas with the old ones, some of them were sitting at the right height and some of them were sitting right down low in there and didn't have much cushion to them anymore. So I've gone off camera now and just installed the little check balls back in, our filters and these little valves and the springs. And then I've just given the whole entire surface here a wipe down with a lint-free rag with a bit of brake clean on it. You want to be really careful, avoid getting any dust and debris in here because it's very sensitive. So that's what you got to do with it, just clean it and try and avoid getting any dirt in there. The edges of all of these are very sharp, so if you use a rag that's quite fluffy, it'll grab it and try and pull it off, so keep that in mind as well. But now with that done, we'll set this half out the way and we'll have a look at the other half of the valve body. So now it's time to do the other half of the valve body. I've already gone along and replaced most of the end plugs in here because they're the exact same process as the other half we just looked at. So that's all of these along here. But we have got this different style end plug up here, and they live behind the solenoids. So we need to pull the solenoids out next, which they're getting replaced anyway. So you're going to remove all these retaining screws along here, and this little plate will come off. When each of the solenoids pop out, you just want to take note of what colours you've got here. Now, if you're replacing these solenoids, they may look a slightly different colour in the packet. So It's not uncommon for these blue ones here to fade to like a dark kind of green colour, and same as these yellow ones to turn brown. Mine aren't too bad, but even still, when I compare them to the new ones, they have changed colour a fair bit. So just keep that in mind. If it's a brown colour, it's a yellow solenoid, and if it's a greeny colour, it's probably a blue one. So behind the solenoids up here, we've got some more end plugs. These are the double O-rings types. Now on one end they've got a screw hole, and this screw hole needs to face outwards. This is presumably because the O-ring makes them fit a lot tighter in this hole, so if you wanted to remove them at a later date, you could put something with a thread in there and pull them out. Now they don't replace every single valve. The first valve up here is an end plug, the traditional bigger round ones, and then the next 4 of this style, and then there's a couple more down here that don't get replaced. So to remove these ones here, there's a retaining clip here, 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 and here. Once again, I've just got a seal pick, and I come along, get your finger in there, because some of these again are spring loaded and want to pop out, so you're just stopping that happening. You just very gently pry up, and then the clip is removed. And then if you tip this forwards, sort of shake it, you need to try and dislodge this. You may need to come in from the top here and sort of help encourage it. There's lots of slots here where you can get tools in. And there we go, a little plug has come out. So like before, I'll do a little comparison of the two of them next to each other. You see they're pretty well the same thing, just the sonnax version has O-rings on it to help it seal better. Now as for installation of these plugs, you got to be careful with them. There's quite a sharp edge inside of here, and I have damaged them before where it will actually peel the sides of the O-rings off when you press them in, and they don't want to go in very easily, so you just got to be careful how you go about doing it. Kind of wriggle them around. Then I take the end of a socket or an extension and press it in. Now what you're looking for is where this clip come out. You will see the internal part of this line up with the hole, and the clip sits in there like so. So as you're pushing with this tool, you need to watch where that is and drop this in. And you need to keep pressure applied to that, because when you do it, there's obviously springs, as you may have seen pop out before, for the rest of the parts inside the valve body here, which will try and pop this straight back out. And there we go. That's how you install those plugs. So now with all of those end plugs changed, we can get around to putting in the new solenoids. And then after that, it's really just buttoning the whole valve body back together. So these just go in with the colours the way that they came out, obviously. And all you got to do is just press them in until they snap. I thought I'd just show real quickly. That's the difference in colour of solenoids on our aged ones compared to new, and these aren't particularly bad. So with all the solenoids installed now, you just need to tighten this retainer plate up to 6 Newton meters. Okay, so now we've got all of our end plugs fitted in here, our accumulator, dampeners, we've cleaned everything up, put a fresh set of solenoids in. The next step is to fit the new separator plate, and then we can put the halves of the valve body back together and start torquing it all back up. So again, as I said, AO52 for my one. I've confirmed that with the separator plate that come out, it is also an AO52. Now there is only one way that this thing can physically go on. It actually matches perfectly the outline of the valve body, so if you sit it on that way, it should be fine. You want to sit it down again on the side where we pulled out all the little check ball valves earlier, and you need to make sure that the little pins of these here line up with the holes in the separator plate. Once that's set down, we can drop this straight on. Now, I also mentioned before I go any further with this, both halves of the valve body have been cleaned down with brake cleaner on a lint-free rag. Want to be very careful just to make sure that there's no lint remaining on here and you haven't dropped any dirt in these passages. Everything's very fine tolerances in here, so if you've dropped something in there, it could potentially go anywhere and cause another problem later down the track. So just try and make sure it's all as clean as you can possibly get it. Now this may be a little bit tricky to sit this down here properly because you can see the spring pressure is trying to stop this separator plate from sitting down flush. Don't force anything because you don't want to damage any of the sealing material. So the next thing I'm going to do is just drop in a handful of bolts. I won't do any of them up tight because you need to rely on the locating pins for the TCM unit, but it'll just hold the sort of whole thing together while I line it all up. Okay, so I've just got a couple in there. None of these are tight, which will allow, you can see, the two halves here to slide around, which means I can get proper alignment for those two alignment pins when I put the TCM unit on. So here's our TCM unit. As I said before, just take note of this. You need to make sure that that little tab there lines up in the shaft that comes out of the valve body here. Okay, that now has our two halves of the valve body lined up and our TCM unit installed, so now we can go ahead and drop in all the bolts for it, and then we can torque them up to the correct spec. So I've just ran all the bolts down here just finger tight, so we need to torque up the ones that join the two halves of the valve body together to 8 Newton meters, and the ones that secure the TCM unit to the valve body to 6 Newton meters. So I'll run down all the bolts to the correct torque to hold the valve body first, and then we'll do the TCM unit second. It's just important to have it in loosely before you torque these up to make sure that those alignment pins are holding the valve body in its correct placement. Now, none of my paperwork has any real tightening sequence or anything for this, so I'm just going to kind of start at one end and work across, and then just do that a few times, because these are in such a jumble order that the chances of me missing one is quite high. So I went back through off camera and rechecked the torque on all of these, and I'm glad I did it, because sure enough I'd missed one, which is this one here. So that's why I can't stress enough, it's important you go the whole way across and just do it a couple of times in case you missed one. So now we're going to do up the TCM bolts. Oddly enough, the manual calls for 6 Newton meters on these instead of 8 like the rest of them. There we go. With that all said and done, that is our valve body reconditioned with a sonnax zip kit installed, new separator plate and new solenoids. So now we just need to swap out those tube seals and bridge seals in the transmission back in the car, which will take all of 5 minutes, and then we can put this one back in and fill it back up with oil. So now we've just got to pop the new bridge seal and tube seals in. Already flicked these out off camera. The bridge seal just pulls out by hand, and then the old little tube seals I just removed with like a basic seal pick, and you just got to get up there and pull them out. They're a little bit tricky, but not too bad. Now with these tube seals, there is a couple of different lengths in the packet. If you're wondering which order they go in, if you look at the transmission itself, it it's actually curved under here. So the inner two are the same and they're the shortest, and then it goes a little bit longer, and then the longest is out at the edge here. So we start here with our two shortest seals. They should just push in. And then our next longest seal. And then the longest one of all of them. And for what it's worth, these seals have got colours. So the first two are black, and then it goes orange, and then this one is blue. And you can even see on the camera here that unlike the seals that pulled out of it, all of these seals protrude a good couple of mil past the surface of the aluminium here, which is exactly how they should be. Now as for the bridge seal, it's just a matter of taking it and pressing it in like so. And now we're ready to move on to valve body installation. There we go, so there's our valve body back in the transmission. I didn't bother filming that part because I basically, with the lack of ground clearance under the car, had to lie directly underneath the transmission and push that in up there, so you wouldn't have been able to see much other than the side of my arm. As for getting it in there, it's not really a challenge or anything, it just goes straight up the same way it came out. Only special attention you need to pay is just up here where that little pin is there. You've got to look for the little arm that comes out. That arm needs to grab straight into the slot that you're looking up above there, and that's for the gear selector. So just make sure that that lines up properly when you put it in. Otherwise, torque-wise, the T40 Torx head bolts are 8 Newton meters as well. And then it's just a matter of pushing that case connector seal back in and pushing this white tab up so it locks into it. And once you're at this point, it's pretty well just putting the transmission pan back on, and then we'll start taking a look at putting oil in it. So I've just whipped the new filter in. All that does is just push up into the valve body, and as I said earlier, just make sure that the seal off the filter, off the old filter, isn't remaining in there. So with that pushed on, all we're going to do now is just whip this pan on, and then we can fill the transmission up. Okay, so it's time to fill this thing up with oil now. I've just got my trusty 1 litre oil transfer pump here, which I use all the time for transmissions, and it works well. I've already put about 3 litres in, and last time I serviced this thing by memory around the 4.5 litre mark or so, it started running out of the filler hole. Now, the refill procedure for the ZF transmission is basically first, the cold fill it up until it starts running out of the filler bung on the side of the transmission. Then start the car up, and with your foot on the brake, cycle it through the gears. So park, reverse, neutral, drive. And then after that, shut the car off and come back under and add some oil to it, and it will take a little bit more. Then after that, you're meant to put the bung back in the transmission and start the car up and run it until the transmission oil reaches 40 degrees Celsius. And then you pull the bung back out and you're meant to have a slow trickle of oil coming out of it. If you don't, you need to add oil until that happens. And if you have oil gushing out of it, you need to let it drain out until it just is a slow trickle. But because of the fact that we've had the transmission so apart, we've had the whole valve body split to pieces, we've lost all the oil in the valve body, and I think it's probably going to be a good idea for me to do an initial fill on it and then go take the car for a short drive and get up the temperature, just to purge any air that's in the valve body. Then I'll bring it back, jack the car up and let it cool down, and then once it's cooled down, we'll proceed with the 40-degree filling procedure. So that's only taken just over 3 litres this time to get that to start trickling. So now I'll start the car up and cycle it through the gears. That'll suck all the oil back up through the pump and everything, which will drain the pan quite a lot. And then we'll give it a top up until it starts running again, put the bung in and take the car for an initial test drive. Okay, so now the transmission's sucked up that initial oil. We'll keep filling it until it overflows again. There we go, 5 litres, and we've now got a trickle from it. So now we'll put that bung back in, take the car for a test drive, get it to temperature, and then once it's cooled down, it's just a matter of doing a refill procedure on it at the correct 40-degree temperature. So I just got back from taking this thing for a quick test drive. It was a little bit flaky at first. When I first put it into drive, it threw a transmission code and went straight into limpo mode. Turning the key off and starting the car again cleared that. I'm guessing when it called for first gear, it basically had a heap of air inside the valve body and it just made it fault. So after that, took it out for a drive and it worked, but it did shift a little bit erratically. This is presumably just because of the fact that the TCM unit in the transmission has learnt all the leaking going on inside of it, solenoid wear, etc. And now that's not present, it makes it not shift properly, so it has to basically unlearn that. Now technically with the ZF gearboxes, you are meant to, if ever you do any work like this to them, do a reset on the transmission adaptations, and this will set all of these values back to 0, and then the car will learn the wear in the clutches, etc., and go from there. But in order to do this on a car like this, you realistically am going to need software like PCM Tech and a Tactrix Open Port 2 to connect to the car. And that's like $1,000 worth of equipment that no one's realistically going to buy just to do a reset on the transmission. Now, as far as I'm aware, it will still learn, or unlearn, I guess you should say, the wear that's in it. And it will eventually end up shifting properly. It just might be slower than if you were to do the reset on it. So now, all I've got to do is I've got to let the car cool down for a couple of hours so that that transmission falls below 40 degrees. And then we'll fill the bung back out of it, start the car up, and just idle it until the transmission hits 40. And set the fluid level properly, and then we're done. After that, I'll drive the car around for a couple of weeks and we'll see how it's going after that. Okay, so the car's now finally cooled down enough that we can take a look at setting the fluid level and the transmission correctly. So currently I've got the car turned off and I've just got the filler bung removed. There's the oil bottle plumbed in, ready to go. So now what I've got to do is just start the car up and let it idle until the pan reaches around 40 degrees. For that, I'm just going to use my little laser thermometer I've got here. Now currently, you'll see that the pan's reading around 36, so we don't have much to go at all, which is really good. Shouldn't take the car long to heat up to that. So we'll start the car up now and just keep scanning that. and once it hits that 40 degrees, we'll pump oil into it real quick until it starts trickling out of the hole, and then cap it off with a filler bung, and then at that point the fluid level is set correctly. You also want to make sure that your car is as level as you can have it while doing this. Alright, so I've had the car idling for about 5 minutes now. Depending where we scan on the pan, sitting around 40. So now we add some fluid to it until it starts running out the hole. And there we go, we finally got some oil starting to flow. I ended up having to unfortunately put a little bit of the old stuff back in there because I grossly underestimated how much oil I would need. That took about 8 litres in the end to get that to run like that. Fortunately, I only serviced this car about 10,000 k's ago, so even though the oil's tinted, it's actually pretty new and not really that dirty. There we go, we'll tighten that bung up now and shut the car off. Righto, so here we are about 8 or 9 months later. I thought I would sort of hold off filming the last part of this video just so I could give the car a really good run and be sure that it was going to work properly. So I did say when I left off in the video earlier that initially when I put this thing back on the road, the gearbox did shift a bit erratically, and after about 10 k's or so, 95% of that came good, and it just had the odd little weird thing here and there where it might shift a bit harsh or something. And then over the next couple of thousand k's, that came out of it entirely, presumably as the TCM unit learnt what it was doing. Now, while this has worked for me with this car, I'm not going to say that this is just going to be a magic cure for everyone's ZF transmission issues, because every one of them is going to have different problems, and there are other issues that happen as they get higher up in the mileage, such as torque converter problems, worn stator bushings, E-clutch issues, and all of these things aren't going to be cured by working on the valve body. But given that this car was sort of a medium mileage car that lived its life in stop and start city traffic, being a delivery vehicle, it sort of makes sense that those first few gears were having troubles in it as they were, and yeah, doing a valve body has fixed it up for me. So I hope this video has been helpful to anyone that's sort of got questions on these, because as far as I could tell, there was nothing out there really covering the ZF gearbox in the FG. If you've got any questions, leave them down in the comments and I'll see what I can do for you. Cheers.